Hi everyone, welcome back to CMN 201. This is for our class for Wednesday, the 7th of December, where we are getting close to the ending of the semester. And where I left off last class is asking you to watch 28 Days Later, a film that I think very much illustrates the 2000s, not just because of its sense of nihilism and annihilation of society, but also the possibility of hope. I left you with thinking about the importance of the word hello in this particular film. You may have noticed that it was the first word that's uttered in the film, and it's the last word that we see when the survivors are trying to signal for help. And we see how part of the word of hello is hell, which I think is the contrast that we see, that we can be in hell basically if we don't interact with one another as community and join forces and work with others. Or we can have community, which means hello and reaching out to other people. And I think we saw that with this new formed family and 28 Days Later, that it was necessary for survival to be able to form a family that wasn't necessarily biologically based and also didn't have some of the class or race differences that oftentimes lead to the destruction of our society. It's no coincidence that this virus in this film is called rage, and that it's contagious because rage is associated with so many of our social ills. And this rage virus of hatred and universal conflict is something that we see perhaps in other films as well, in that we've got a film like Get Out, which is coming up, that talks a little bit about the rage and the envy of issues like racism and classism and sexism, but particularly racism, which I'll get to in a moment. So one of the things I've always appreciated about 28 Days Later is that although we oftentimes talk about the ending of the world as the ending of humanity, that's not the case at all. And that beautiful scene where we see the horses running wild, the idea that the natural world is reverting back to its former state and perhaps an even better state. And those black and white horses running together. Again, this sense of unity and unification. With the film that critiques all of our current societal structures, the media, and think about how this was prior to our social media concerns now. The government, and we see how ultimately what's supposed to be a savior is going to take advantage of this new world order. The military, again, taking advantage of this new world order, and even consumerism, all of those billboards and these empty places, just to go and illustrate just how meaningless all of our consumption has been. You see souvenirs littered on the ground, and we see how our main character Jim is trying to pick up pieces of money that have become useless and meaningless. They're just litter. They're just paper at this point. And one of the things that I've always enjoyed about this particular film is that it leaves us with this sense of hope. I've told you that there are sequels. I don't particularly enjoy the sequels as much, or the sequel, I should say, 28 weeks later as much as I do 28 days later. And I think I had indicated that there were plans for 28 months later prior to our own virus, that being COVID, and that was put on halts. I'm not quite sure where that stands at this particular point in time. Now, your final project, and I hope that you are in the midst of doing it, is going to be due at the ending of the semester, which happens to be quite soon, the 21st, which is Wednesday. So many of you have already reached out and talked to me about your final project. So certainly, if you've got any questions or concerns about the final project, let me know. The 21st is also when I will be posting the final exam. It will be an essay exam that's open book, open notes, and I will be posting it on the 21st by 6 p.m., which is when our class would be meeting. And you would have 24 hours to take that examination. So you would have up until Thursday, the 22nd, to submit that in. If we were taking that exam in person, you would be devoting 2 to 3 hours to that exam, which is about as much time as I anticipate that you would need for this exam. Certainly not 24 hours, but you've got 24 hours in which to take it. And as I indicated, open book, open notes, so you could utilize things like the journals that you've been writing over the course of the semester, your textbook, the notes, things of that nature, where you can synthesize what we've been talking about in terms of Gothic. So in terms of Get Out 2017, this film is what inspired this particular class. I remember watching this film in the theater and leaving and thinking there has to be a way that I can construct a class around this film. The director, Jordan Peele, was known for his work in comedy, and now he's moved into horror. The film won an Academy Award for the original screenplay, Jordan Peele being the first Black winner. So it's quite important historically, but it also is very important from a sociological perspective. So I've been suggesting that all of these films talk about the tensions and anxieties of their time. And this particular film, I think, is very much a commentary on 2010s and the idea that the true monster, the true American monster, is racism. Keep in mind the political climate of the time. The idea that Barack Obama, our first Black president, meant that we had overcome our struggles with racism and with prejudice. Sadly, we see that that is the exact opposite when you fast forward to 2022. We're still living through the pushback from some of that election. It's no surprise, too, that in the horror films we've seen and in horror films in general, there is a lack of African-American representation. It's something that Jordan Peele has worked to rectify in not only this film, but his following 2 films. Both I recommend. Us, which is very much an examination of class as well as race. And then finally, I was just able to see Nope recently. A very different kind of film than the films he's done in the past, but also a great commentary on the idea of what is considered real and valid, and how do you document that? And if it's not documented, is it real or is it valid? So Get Out shows us, or Jordan Peele was hopeful that it would show us what the life of a Black man might be like. And we see all kinds of microaggressions. These are small aggressions from ignorant, awkward, liberal elite to finally we see how they mask some huge macroaggressions. I'm not going to give away too many spoilers for this particular film. It's the kind of film that you can see over and over again. And each time you watch it, you'll see more nuance, more symbolism, more commentary. Jordan Peele is a very, he's a very deliberate director. And you can see that in the notes below, I've got some comments about the film that I'm going to be talking about next class, just in the event that you wanted to get an idea of some of the things that I'll be talking about next class, which is our last class. But if you don't want spoilers, then don't read the notes below and watch the film first, and then you can read the notes afterwards, which again I'll be talking about. And Get Out had an alternate ending, and I believe that probably Jordan Peele made the right choice by choosing the ending that he chose. But I also wanted you to be able to watch that alternate ending, which is a couple of minutes long. It's on YouTube, and you can see that I've included the link. And the attendance question for today is about that alternate ending. The attendance question would be due Friday, the 9th of December by noon. But of course, if you need additional time, let me know. Do you prefer the film ending or the alternate ending of Get Out, and why? Which ending did you prefer? The ending that was included in the film or in the alternate ending? Meanwhile, I'm catching up on my grading and my journal, so you should be getting some journals back from me shortly. And what we will do next class is not only talk about Get Out, but I've got one last documentary for you to watch Remember, we had watched a documentary at the beginning of the semester, and this happens to be about the idea of horror film and Black representation or lack thereof in horror film. So it seemed like a good way to close the class, especially after Get Out. And much like the first documentary, you won't necessarily have to write a journal on it. Your last journal is on Get Out. You'll notice, too, that in some of the readings I had assigned from the text horror film, it talks about spooky sounds and the colors of fear, the importance of sound and color in horror film, which I think we've seen over the course of the semester. Also, in our text Nightmares, gives us a great filmography at the end, so that if you are interested in finding more films in the horror film genre, that's a great place to go to. And we didn't have a whole lot of time to talk about cross-platforms, but as you know, many of the films that we've watched were inspired by novels. So there's a very close connection between book and film for horror film. Though Halloween kind of broke that tradition by giving us the film first and then the novel was constructed afterwards. Radio. And think about the old days of the radio plays. And that said, you know, when you may be familiar with Orson Welles, and he was quite famous for a radio broadcast that he did called War of the Worlds, where basically he adapted a text by H.G. Wells, no relation, about an invasion from Mars. It so horrified people that individuals thought it was real. They began to try to vacate cities. They were clogging up the phone lines. There are even reports of some people committing suicide, preferring that to being taken over by alien presence. So there's a long tradition with horror and radio. And just think about television as well. So we've been focusing mostly on film, but of course, television has lots of anthology series. And in fact, one television show that I can recommend to you that was on HBO is called Lovecraft Country. And it was done by Jordan Peele. And even though, or not done by Jordan Peele, he was one of the producers. He wasn't necessarily a director, but he helped and visualize this particular project. And if you know anything about H.P. Lovecraft, he's a very famous Gothic writer. So there are lots of different ways that you can think about how horror film has influenced other genres like novels, radio, and TV, or the other way around, how novels, radio, and TV have influenced horror film. Finally, video games, and that's a genre in and of itself, and I think I might have shared with you in terms of final projects that a previous semester I had a student who actually constructed a video game after horror film. You know, so you think about some of the big video games, Resident Evil, for instance, and their connection to film, and vice versa. So, that said, I wanted you to watch Get Out and determine whether or not you prefer the film ending or you prefer the alternate ending that Jordan Peele decided not to include. The film is 1 hour and 44 minutes. So enjoy. In next class, I'll talk about the film in greater depth, and I will leave you with one last documentary. So I hope you're doing well. I'm doing well. We will continue on next class. Take care. Bye-bye.